All right, let's do this.
Welcome, first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli, where everyone deserves a seat at the table, especially our next incredible guest, who joins us today to talk about the intersection between race and sports, mental health, leadership, equality, social injustice, and white privilege. So grab your favorite deli sandwich or bagel and your favorite beverage, and let's do this together in the Sports Deli. We're so truly honored on this 23rd day of Mental Health Awareness Month and exactly 1 month away from the 50th anniversary of Title IX to welcome ESPN columnist and ESPN radio host Sarah Spain. The pride of Lake Forest, Illinois, she attended Cornell University where she earned her degree in English. In high school, Sarah was MVP and captain of her track and field hockey, and basketball teams. Was a heptathlete on the Cornell Big Red track and field team, for which she was co-captain her senior year. And for those of you that don't know, the heptathlon includes 7 events. She's a comedian, loves live music and great wine, and dominating rec league games in various sports. She loves dogs. She was born the same day as Liz Cambage of the WNBA and the same year as USA gymnasts Christy Powell, Abby Wambach, Venus Williams, Michelle Kwan, and Sue Bird. She's involved in a number of charities. She's won numerous awards, and she loves her beloved Chicago teams, of course, but she really loves her Chicago Red Stars, one of the original 8 teams of the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League, of which she is a co-owner, who have now won 3 in a row, by the way, after their 4-2 victory last night over the Orlando Pride.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely. She's recently, again, one of the ESPNW Summit hosts, which was a phenomenal event that I watched again online this year. And you can find her on Instagram at Spain2323. I think I have an idea why that is the number, where she has over 133,000 followers, and on Twitter at Sarah Spain, where she has over 262,000 followers, and on her website at sarahspain.com. You can listen to her on ESPN Radio's Spain and Fitz weeknights, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you don't want to miss some of her hilarious paint mixing TikTok videos where she tries to guess which team the paint colors are referencing as the paint is being mixed. Oh, man, welcome to the Sports Daily Podcast, where everyone deserves a seat at the table.
Thank you for having me.
Man, so there's a lot of topics that we usually talk about. And honestly, you know, I always do a lot of prep work. And I don't usually start with this, but I watched that video. I know it's 6 years old, you know, of the tweets, and I had to pause it several times, really because of the guys' reactions. And so I just want to ask you first, before I go back to what it was like growing up, because, you know, for me, since 2020, that sort of changed things for me. I was doing this and I was like, I can't talk about something that's irrelevant an hour and a half later anymore. I just can't do it. And so I've been very critical, which I'll ask you about later, of especially the white quarterbacks and the white influencers in the NFL. And I've seen more allies in the white space than before 2020. So I just want to ask you, you know, first share with everyone what that was like, because I think it goes to, you know, misogyny, obviously, and, you know, the double standard and the different narratives that take place in the world, let alone sports. And then we'll sort of, you know, go from there and talk about that.
Well, the video, for people who want to watch it, is called More Than Mean. And this great guy, Brad Burke, came up with the concept after reading articles every once in a while that address the treatment of female sports reporters on social media, and thinking, when you read the story, it's moving, but then it's pretty easy to move past it and go back on with your day. And he wanted to create something more visceral. So he came up with this idea that sort of mirrored the idea of mean tweets from Jimmy Kimmel, but instead of being funny, the tweets get progressively worse and more terrible. And he just wanted to show how much different it feels to both say out loud and digest face to face those kind of comments from people. So you had men come in who were not the ones who wrote them and were unsuspecting. And to your point about their reactions, that's one of the fascinating things about it to me, is that we're sort of used to hearing women talk about the things that happen to them or the treatment that they get. And historically and currently, some people sort of shrug, and the effects that things have on women are not a priority to them. Whereas when men look vulnerable and upset and sad and distraught, it feels different. And so for as frustrating as that is to hear, it was a big part of the impact of that video was that it wasn't simply women sharing things that had happened to them or how it affects them. It was looking at how men were affected by it. And I'd like to say it's changed. It hasn't. That particular video did coincide with a couple of other things going on concurrently that did affect Twitter policy and change some of the ways that they try to impact abuse and harassment online. And I think some people will push back and say that happens to men in sports too, but it's different. It's specific to things that they say or do. And for women, so much of it is just for existing in the space, for caring about and being passionate about sports, for having opinions about sports. And the kind of harassment, which you can see in the video, is very gendered and violent. And so what was crazy about that is it happened right before my wedding. And so it originally had put a hiatus on saying yes to anything outside of work because I was so busy prepping. And when Brad approached me, I said, this is something that I care about. And he said, "I'll just take an hour or two on one day." And then the video came out and it went so viral that in that 2 weeks before the wedding, I've got ABC News Tonight in my lobby of my building doing interviews. I'm doing ESPN and NPR and endless interviews, and the Kardashians and Jared Leto and Aaron Andrews and Brene Brown and all these people are retweeting it, and I'm doing all these interviews. And I was so grateful, but it ended up going not as I imagined in terms of timing. And yeah, a lot of people still watch it. A lot of people use it in their classrooms to talk about it. And I do think it has a very still visceral impact when you watch it, to understanding that the words that you put down when you're typing and may feel so distant are still going to deeply affect the people that get them on the other end. And understanding that we don't have the same psychosomatic responses to conversation when we can't see what the other person is doing, and that our bodies as humans naturally want to connect with others. So if I see your tiny movement of your eyebrow or your head and I think maybe you disagree or you're hurt, I might change the way I'm talking to you. But online, we don't do that. We never see what we're writing and how it affects the people on the other end. And the empowerment that that has for some people who wish cruelty is actually really dangerous when we don't confront it and talk about it.
Did you say that you haven't seen much change since then? Did I hear you correctly? Or
Yeah, I mean, what has changed is it is not as, I think, common to face abuse simply for existing in the space, because there are more women and we are doing more different jobs, everything from ownership to play by play to color to analysis to whatever, whereas it used to be sort of sidelines reporting or hosting and facilitating debate between men. There are a wide range of opportunities and jobs. And I think the more women there are, the less novel it feels and the less opportunity there is for people to criticize just the existence of women in the space. I would say more that social media hasn't changed because it's not a sports media fix. It's a centuries of living in a patriarchy and uh, just
double
inherently
standard?
held beliefs about women.
Yeah.
I went and saw Anita Hill speak at a Chicago Humanities Fest thing a week or two ago. And one thing that stood out to me that she talked about in terms of issues of harassment and rape and domestic violence and other gendered violence is it's not just about believing women. She said it's about caring if it happens. And that she thinks that the Supreme Court and everybody who listened to her believed what she said about Clarence Thomas, that they believed Christine Blasey Ford. They just didn't care enough to disrupt the either system that was in place or the appointment of the man that they wanted. And I think across so many places, that's the truth. They might believe that something happened. They just don't really care if these things happen to women, if it means they have to replace a president that makes them a lot of money or a high powered talent or a great quarterback or whatever it is. So the idea of getting the belief is only the first step. After that, there has to be a value placed on the lives and experiences and traumas of women, which just frankly isn't there for a lot of people because of, again, centuries of patriarchy and the way we sort of, as society, are conditioned to view men as the main character and women as ancillary characters to either help or hinder their success.
But there are strength in numbers, and you
Hmm.
referenced it a little bit, and there are changes besides just sideline reporters. That's just sort of, a play on your point. But, there are changes that can be made in political arenas, which we saw with the WNBA. And as we approach the 50th anniversary of Title IX, I have an 11-year-old daughter, I was basically raised by women, and I've been coaching women for the last 15 years. And so, I've been sort of in a different space with a different compass, since that time. And so, you know, w- what's the most important thing going forward as we approach the 50th anniversary of Title IX?
I think it's a couple. I think one is understanding that even the most secure feeling policy can be ripped away. And we're seeing that now in Roe v. Wade. And we even saw it with Betsy DeVos trying to weaken policies relating to Title IX when it came to safe spaces on campus for victims of sexual harassment and assault. A lot of people see Title IX as only sports related. It is inherent and important to every part of the education that men, women, trans, binary, non-binary, whoever receive. Not just that their opportunity to play in sport or music or whatever else, but to be safe and to feel safe in their pursuit of an education. And the idea that the policy has been in place for 50 years doesn't mean it's staying in place. There needs to be a continued fight. And I think there's a balance between recognizing that young girls will grow up in a space that is very different than that of the 70s when Title IX was passed, but not so different that they shouldn't be taught about the fight that it required. That there was a small group of women that came together and were able to create a change that has had vast effects on education for women, opportunity for women in terms of admission, sport, everything else. And to learn about that so that they aren't doomed to repeat the things that came before the passage of Title IX. The other one I would say is to continue to demand more equity and equality across spaces where the gatekeepers have been predominantly cis white men, because the changes that can take place when the people in charge have a diversity of experience and perspective are massive. And we're seeing that across some spaces in sports specifically already. I think social media has really opened the eyes of people to passion for things outside of the big four men's sports. And when you used to have only program directors for radio and TV and editors for newspapers and magazines, being straight middle-aged white men saying, no, people aren't interested in that. And then you've got social media that opens up the opportunity for really passionate and great content to rise above, even if it isn't supported by the biggest platforms, and prove to people that, people want to learn about women's sports or they want to hear about other things. So applying that same idea of the gatekeepers being removed from ownership, presidencies, GMs, coaching, all of that changes the landscape so dramatically. So I think focusing on that. The other thing is, of course, that when Title IX anniversary passes, what are we doing 50 days after? What are we doing 10 years after, right? And not just have it be a moment where we pay it some lip service and don't acknowledge that in its entire history in the last 50 years, compliance has never actually been suitable and appropriate. It's across high school and college. Compliance for Title IX is still illegal in many places and not being followed correctly. So how do we continue to work to get up to standard?
Yeah, we had Legends of the Ball on, and we had Judy Sweet, the first female president in the history of the NCAA, former athletic director at UCSD, and she talked about how difficult it was for her. I can't even imagine in the 90s,
Yeah.
being a female athletic director. And so you clearly must have had good support growing up, because you're sort of in between, like not at the beginning of Title IX, but there was sort of a shift, when
Yeah.
you were younger, and you played multiple sports, which, was probably encouraged, and then went on to star in track at Cornell, as I so eloquently did not say in the intro. But what was it like being a kid as a woman? Did your sister kick your butt? Were you able to just be yourself and find yourself? Like what was it like being Sarah as a kid, as a young girl?
Yeah, I had an older sister, about a year and a half older. And we both were really into sports as kids. My parents were very active into sports, but didn't really watch sports, which people are always really shocked to hear.
Wow.
They always assumed that like my dad took me to Cubs games or something. Never, not once. I've never been to a single sporting event with my dad. He has only been to watch my sister or I compete. I don't even know that
Wow.
he's been to a professional sporting event in, I don't even know, 60 years, 50 years. I have no idea.
Wow.
I would have to ask him. My mom watches a lot more sports than my dad, but even she mostly watches like WNBA to see someone I played against or someone I've talked about, or they'll flip on. They flipped on some playoff game in January, and my dad walked by and he was like, "Is this the Super Bowl?" I was like, "No." Um,
Oh my
so
God.
yeah, people are always very surprised to hear, but they were active. So we grew up playing sports in our backyard. We grew up playing tennis and golf and horseback riding and softball in the backyard, and whatever we could get our hands on. We were both very tall and very athletic at a young age, so we competed with each other a lot. We played USTA tennis, and then when it was too hard to balance the outside sports with the sports at school, I was also in band and chorus. So I was like
Oh my
chock
God.
full all day long, so busy. We stopped doing the outside stuff like the horseback riding and USTA and stuff. My sister played tennis at Lehigh and then switched over to track
Oh,
for a couple years. And then yeah, so I mean, I would say probably the most defining part of who I am in terms of my personality and my fearlessness is the fact that my parents are lawyers. They have a law practice together, and my mom and dad were really partners, literally and in work. So even though
wow.
my mom is still a Renaissance woman who goes to be a lawyer full time, but then also can make a beautiful dinner and weave a basket out of reeds that she plucks and bleaches, and then make a blanket. And we just hiked the Grand Canyon together. She's 70. We went all the way down to the bottom and camped out and came back up. She made her own
Oh,
walking stick from a tree branch. And this
oh
is
my
not like
God.
wilderness lady. She's a full-time lawyer, but she was at their house in Michigan. They go on the weekends, and she like felled a tree branch and stripped the bark and whittled it and whatever.
Wow.
So she's just a crazy, amazing, incredibly wonderful person. But that balance, I think, was huge, and it was very subtle. I mean, there were moments when I was young that I was sad that my mom couldn't come to some lunchtime event at school, or some
Of
like
course.
5 p.m. thing with moms and daughters, and I was sad. But thankfully, I had some teachers and adults in my life who were very forthright about saying, "You're very lucky that you have this incredible role model, and it's going to take you very far." And so I was aware early that having this badass mom was going to help. Now, as far as the sports side, that was probably more Michael Jordan than my mom and dad, other
Of
than
course.
genetics. It was, growing up with the 90s Bulls, becoming obsessed with them, and then taking my interest. And also I was 6 feet tall by the time I was 12. So I just was like working people at the junior high level, which gave me a passion for sport. Um, so yeah, it was all those things. But I try to think about it sometimes, especially when I'm talking to my friends who have kids, like, were my parents like preachy about things, or was it just they displayed it? And I think it was more that they just set an example, and whether it was by taking us to cultural things, having us read books, talking about things at the dinner table, I don't remember them having to be like, girls can do anything. It was just more like the idea that we couldn't do something was never introduced.
Mhm.
So it wasn't until later in life, actually, when I tried to get into sports, that I was sort of smacked across the face with like, oh, I was so used to being able to go into spaces and and
Right.
and be like, I can do whatever I want, that it was a little bit of a wake up call to that reality.
Well, I'm sure now looking back on it, you're not only grateful for your parents, but for all the pioneers and the
Yes.
heroes and the people that laid the foundation so you could have that comfort level,
Hmm.
to just go about, trying anything as a young girl, you
Yeah.
and
I
your
mean, it's hard to
sister.
imagine growing up and there just not being opportunity. Like, just the women who grew up and wanted to play, and there were no girls teams or resources or coaches or opportunities, or not being able to go keep competing at the collegiate level and all that. Yeah, it's um there's a study that Ernst and Young has done for ESPN. Well, they've done it separately, but ESPNW cites it a lot. The most recent number I remember was that 94% of women in C suites across America played sports at some organized level. 94%. It is sort of immeasurable what you learn in terms of leadership, teamwork, working with people you don't necessarily choose but need to get the job done, um, delegating tasks, balancing your time management, all the things. And like, if you're an athlete your whole life, you don't really notice until you get out in the real world that not everybody has all of those skills and has had the experiences that offered those up. And then you really start to look back and think, man, did being on a bunch of sports teams really change me as a person and a leader, and in every other aspect of life. It's really I don't know where I'd be without sports, really.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because people will say a lot of times, "Well, what's the point? I'm not going pro." I've heard that so many times. And so one of my assistant coaches, when I was a head JUCO coach here in San Diego, he always told the girls in that first preseason meeting, he worked at Upper Deck, and so this will never happen again. But he had Tiger Woods, Kobe, MJ, Kevin Durant, Joe Montana, Ken Griffey Jr., and Wayne Gretzky under his umbrella.
Wow.
He was in charge of all of them. And he always told the girls, when I look to hire people, because he's now a CEO at SportRx, when I look to hire people, I want to see if they played sports.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would go along the list of what you just talked about
Mm-hmm.
and how, it tells him all he needs to know about who you are in large part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's true, and it's just a great thing to, especially girls, because girls quit more than boys. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a really invaluable lesson to share with young girls that, hey, it's not always about winning and
Right.
losing or going
Well,
pro.
and their parents and communities, because I'm actually on the Gatorade Women's Advisory Board, and one of our main goals is trying to understand and stop the 6th to 8th grade age when girls drop out at twice the rate of boys. And
Right.
looking across, it really depends a lot on the financial status of the neighborhood, what the biggest threats are, because it can be things like, you know, social pressures of boys and makeup, and is it cool to be in sports as a girl. It can be resources where the communities stop funding fields and shoes and whatever for the girls side, it just do it for the boys side. It can be, to your point, parents who tell their kids, well, if you're my daughter, you're not going to be in the NBA, so there's no reason for us to keep, taking you to practice and funding this. um, there's a lot of research going into understanding that pivot point and why that age is the one where the big
Mm.
drop off occurs. And so yeah, it's really so important to, and I think it's getting better because our coverage of female athletes at the professional level is becoming so much more multidimensional, where we allow them to be authentically themselves instead of just this like infantilized idea of like your
Right.
little girl grown up role model, and making them be seen as the authentic selves that they are, just like we do with male athletes, makes them more aspirational and interesting and cool, as opposed to before when it was like so rigid. And
Yeah.
it really not only furthered stereotypes about who women are that pursue sports and keep playing, but also really restricted that whole, if you could see it, you could be it, because you weren't seeing yourself if you were a certain race or ethnicity or religion or sexuality or anything. And now it's just the gamut.
Yeah. So to that point, it's not shut up and dribble anymore, not just as athletes, but in your space, because I would imagine from the time when you began, well, once you realized you weren't going to be a stand-up comedian and you got into the
Never too
sports
late.
space, it's never too late, right? But you feel more comfortable being your more authentic self now, right? Instead of feeling like, okay, I work for the Disney company and ESPN, and I better just do my job, because I talk to Jamel Hill all the time, and I know the timing of that was just, if she was working there now, it probably wouldn't
Yeah.
even be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there was a really noticeable moment when it came to advocating for other women early in my career that felt very organic. It was like I started out, most of the spaces I was in, my first job at Fox Sports Net out in LA was about 2 to 3 women in the room and about 40 something men every day. And so you grow a thick skin, you pick your battles. You have obviously very clear set lines for things that are like harassment, but you just deal with the jokes sometimes about the WNBA or women or whatever it is, because you're not going to spend all day fighting. You're just going to work hard until you can, get some agency and some voice. And when I moved to Chicago and started working in local radio, I was the first woman that they had on the air in 11 years on a daily basis. And I was just doing updates. I wasn't hosting. And I started out trying to just be the girl that everyone wanted to grab a beer with and talk sports. And, the majority of listeners were male. The audience they were aiming for was male. A lot of the content was still somewhat misogynist at times. And a couple years in, I was like, I care a lot more about changing the space for women that are coming than I do about just having people like me. So when this stuff starts, I'm going to go in and turn my mic on. And in a funny way, that doesn't make things awkward, I'm going to call them out for this BS that they're saying, and the idiocy that they're spreading. I'm going to tell them that, like, there's women listening that don't want to be like treated like they're not included and involved.
Right.
So when it comes to really anything relating to fairness and equity and equality and social issues that I care about, it's really hard for me to be quiet. It's really hard. And
Right.
I understand that there are lines at work and at play. And I understand that I'm ESPN's Sarah Spain when I work there, even when I'm not working, because that's the benefit that I'm afforded from ESPN. And tons of opportunities are because of that connection. So I can't just drop it when I feel like it. That being said, I think there are ways to talk about social issues that people politicize that are not politics. They are humanity issues, and talking about them in a way that's productive and constructive and informative, as opposed to taking personal shots or otherwise, is this the way I have to focus those efforts, because I can't simply ignore major things that affect my life and the lives of people of color and LGBTQ plus and women everywhere and whatever else. But I can be smart about how I address them. And I think you're right. Like, Jamel was just caught in a space where so many companies were trying to figure out, how do we remain inclusive and align with the policies that we say we are as a company, while someone in charge and many of the people that work for that person don't agree with the ideas of diversity, equity, inclusion that we claim. And there are many sports fans that are in line with that person in charge and are not going to want to hear criticism of it. So it was a really awkward time, I think, for anybody who wanted to speak their mind about that stuff.
Let me ask you this question, because you said you have to pick your battles. So there's just a lot out there right now between Roe versus Wade and just other things going on in terms of taking away privacy from people is really what and it's going to end up boiling down to. And so there's a senator and he's also a doctor in Louisiana who basically tried to skew some statistics and say that, well, if basically black women weren't a part of the equation, then the numbers wouldn't look so bad. And besides that being disgusting enough, it's not really what I want to go down in terms of the rabbit hole. I want to ask you in terms of advocacy, like, how do you know what's a battle that somebody should be fighting? Because, like, I called out Drew Brees today.
Right.
Because when you make a mistake like he made, and then there's somebody in that state, even though he's, a God-fearing man, I get all that, he's a good guy, and I think he made a mistake, and he faced the repercussions. But when you hear something like that, and I've been so critical of Tom, Troy, Tony, Blondie, Eli and Peyton in particular, because I don't understand with all of their platforms, there hasn't been one of them that has publicly about any of these policies that you just talked about shouldn't be politicized.
Yep.
Saying one thing, and it's not about the fact that somebody from Black Lives Matter bought a mansion. Who cares? She's an outlier. So at what point do you guys, as white influencers like Sarah Spain, when are you going to pick a battle?
Right.
Like, I don't want end racism in the back of the end zones and on the back of the helmet anymore.
Right.
Like, at what point is it like, come on, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think
all of them. It's like 7 white guys that haven't said one thing about any of this stuff. You talk about picking your battles. This is my battle.
I mean, I think ironically, one of the people that took a bit of a stand a couple years ago was Aaron Rodgers. I remember Mina interviewed him about Colin Kaepernick, and he said almost nothing. And then he called her back and said, you know what? I regret not saying anything. If people like me never say anything and step up, then the other people don't have enough power in this league to say it without repercussions. You can so easily be cut or traded, and that's not going to happen to me. So I need to be one of the people who says something. Again, wasn't a huge thing. You could do so much more, but it's interesting now watching the path that he's taken since. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. It should not be only the people of color with great power and influence advocating for themselves, in the same way that women shouldn't have to be only advocating for the rights to their own bodies and privacy. It obviously needs to be people in power.
Yeah, and those that should be advocating for people of color and women, both those examples we just talked about, it should be white men.
Yeah, and allies with the power to affect change. And I'm deeply disappointed in so many white people and the decisions that they make in refusing to educate themselves enough to understand systemic racism, to understand the policies that have been in place for centuries that create the reality that we live in now that they believe to be happenstance, because they don't care enough to educate to understand how they arrived where they are and the multiple lotteries that they won by virtue of the zip code, the parents, the genetics, whatever it is, that affords them a different experience.
And the color of their skin.
Yeah, and I can't really tell what Tom Brady's deal is, right? He certainly at one point was aligned with the former president, had his hat in his locker, and now claims that there wasn't anything. And so I don't know, there's certain people. Drew Brees is another one who I think very clearly is very conservative. Um, tried to dig his way out of the comments regarding Kaepernick and veterans, but has never really advocated that much to dispel people's thoughts about some of the other issues that he aligns with. So I don't know if that's the guy who's going to do it for you. But there are certainly, outspoken athletes who pick battles, and I wonder why they don't decide that some of the other ones are as important.
Yeah, I know. I heard Mark Cuban say, we'll get to the rapid fire in a second. I heard Mark Cuban say, I've talked to a lot of football owners and they don't even listen to me. So
No,
I'm not saying it's easy. JJ
no,
Redick obviously has been very outspoken. He called out, somebody on ESPN a couple weeks ago because he could just feel the undertones.
right,
And so that's what, to your point about being educated, when you do podcasts or you do shows and then you start educating people and then they call you and say, hey, you used the word articulate when you were talking about a
right,
person of color. And so there's these nuances that you
yeah,
now understand and you're paying attention to in a way that you wouldn't
yeah,
have if you didn't buy a Toyota. Now you're
right,
noticing all the Toyotas on the road
right,
in the same kind of way. Not to compare this whole issue with cars, but it's just the point of you have to be, if you're going to be anti-racist, all you got to do is be conscious and deliberate.
right.
It's
And
not
you
that
listen
hard.
and care, which for some
Yes.
people they don't want to be disrupted or affected in any way by issues that don't challenge them. And that includes
Right.
simple stuff like changing their language. The idea that people fight so hard to be able to say certain things or to be able to make jokes at certain people's expenses, and you want to just ask them why. Why do you need that so badly? Especially because all it does is reinforce your ideas of power and the idea that you can't imagine not being able to do whatever you want. Well, now imagine being a woman or a person of color or a person of a certain ethnicity or faith or race that's marginalized. Now imagine all of the things that have stood in their way, and you're getting your in a bunch about being asked to use the proper terms for trans people or being asked not to bully and punch down at people who are at risk of increased violence and suicide, and you're like, oh, like, have a sense of humor. No, have a sense of perspective. The problem is that, like, I think also we are in such a place of immediate rushing to shame and gotcha over conversation, and people who are defensive are not going to listen. So if you rush in with the f you yada yada versus the hey, so just so you know, this is
Right.
the proper terminology or this is whatever. And then if they still refuse, then you could say, why does it matter to you so much to be able to say something that someone is telling you is incredibly hurtful or triggering or whatever it is? And eventually you get to the point where, like, okay, you're just not really a good person. And I don't know there's that famous thing, like, I don't know how to teach you to care about other people. If you just don't, there's deeply rooted stuff that we're going to have to deal with before we can get to word choices or anti-racist practices.
Yeah, I guess I skipped a few steps. So to pivot, you guys interviewed you and Fitz, Drew Robinson,
Yeah,
and I obviously saw the story originally, but how did that impact? Have you been in the mental health space in any way? Like my father killed himself when I was 9, so obviously
I'm
I've been
sorry.
sort of paying attention. Yeah, I mean it's a superpower now. At the time, it was beyond traumatic, but
Yeah,
and I'm seeing the world in a different way ever since because of it. And so, as a life coach, as a professional basketball skills trainer, whatever I'm doing, I had Dr. Russ Kennedy, an anxiety doctor, on yesterday on my podcast, and his dad was schizophrenic and bipolar, and he killed himself, and then he did LSD, and he went to India on a yoga journey to find himself. So, but we were talking about it more. And
Yeah.
so, do you find yourself more comfortable talking about it? Is it something that you've always been a part of?
Not always, no. And I actually have found I've gotten really interested in like human behaviors and neurology and things like that. That has sort of led me down a path of understanding more about just how our brains work and the differences in people. I would say there's a couple things that have triggered more of an interest for me. One is I ended up sort of pseudo mentoring this girl who was a college journalist when we first met, and she reached out for advice and then wanted to meet up with me on a shooting day to just shadow and see how we shot a video and stuff. So I've stayed in touch with her, and she suffers from serious depression, and so in trying to help her despite not knowing a lot about it, I found myself trying to research more and understand it more. I actually found this cartoon that I always send people because I found it to be oddly like one of the most deeply felt moments for me in terms of understanding the feelings of it without having experienced it. The cartoon's called Hyperbole and a Half, and I think it's called Depression Part Two. It's quirky but really powerful. And then Kate Fagan, my former ESPN colleague who now works at Meadowlark, wrote a book called What Made Maddie Run, and it's about a University of Penn student, beautiful, successful Ivy League athlete who died by suicide, and her family and friends had no idea that she was struggling. And after Kate wrote this beautiful article, the family gave her access to her computer and phone to go through all the metadata and really truly understand what she was sending her friends and what she was feeling herself and all this stuff. And interspersed in the book are some studies, pretty early on studies of the effects of social media on kids, the current state of mental health at colleges, the increasing rates of suicidal ideologies and things like that. So that got me more interested. And then on my podcast, I've gotten into neuroplasticity, which is a relatively new understanding since like probably the 70s or 80s, that our brains can actually be changed physically by practices. So we can create synapses, essentially bridges in our brain to access ways of thinking more quickly without it needing to be intentional. It's sort of like you do it enough times, it becomes habit, the same way,
Mhm.
sports are. You keep practicing and then
Right.
your forehand just happens without you thinking about it. Well, the same thing can happen. And it used to feel very hippy dippy, the idea of,
Right. Right.
gratitude practices. But when it's backed by science, I suddenly got really interested, particularly for people who struggle from mental health and depression issues, because the idea that a regular practice of gratitude would turn your body toward that in a moment without you choosing it. And I use
Mm.
it specifically for things that I know are triggers for me, which are when I'm super stressed and super crazy busy and I have a schedule and something goes wrong. I can't find parking, or the store is inexplicably closed, or the errand I need to do and I can't do now. And instead of having it blow up my day, which I recognized was irrational, I was like, there's real problems in the world. Why the heck are you so freaked out about this? But I just know my day's like a Jenga board, and you pull one out and everything falls apart. And I get so angry that I needed to learn in advance what's the choice I'm going to make when this happens. And then practicing reacting that way. And so it ends up helping with massive important things like COVID, where I had probably 3 really bad days during the 2.5 years of COVID. Instead, it was, gosh, I'm so grateful for this house. And I'm grateful for
Right.
my dogs. And I'm grateful I have a job. And I'm grateful that I can sit and read more books now. And I'm grateful that I have time to do. And it came naturally instead of having to talk myself out of
Wow.
darker thoughts. And it doesn't I
Mm.
don't I'm not going to say it works for people who do have diagnosed mental health issues. I
Right.
obviously talk to experts about that, but what they've learned about it is so powerful. And so yeah, I think I've
Mm.
gotten more interested in it just because I'm fascinated by our brains and neuroplasticity and like the choices that we can make every single day to make ourselves happier and more grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that didn't check out the Drew Robinson story, you should check it out and listen to that at the 17-minute mark of that episode of Spain and Fitz. on ESPN. Yeah, we've had Joanne McCauley on, former women's basketball coach at Duke, and I read her book in a day and a half, Secret Warrior, and it's very interesting to hear people's stories and just to realize that they're not alone. I think that's part of it. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the rapid fire. Do you have any favorite dinosaurs?
I always kind of liked a pterodactyl.
Oh yeah, I like pterodactyls. What's your favorite bobblehead you have behind you?
I mean, I hate to be self-serving, but this happens to be a Sarah Spain bobblehead.
I love it.
This came even before my ownership in the Red Stars. So, I mean, I don't know. There's a bunch of them. There's tons of Bears ones, and there's
Of
a
course.
RBG and a Elena
Oh, I
Deladon. But
love
I
it.
mean, I don't know how you could beat your own bobblehead.
Man, that's phenomenal. So you love peanuts, not like the
Yeah.
ones you eat, but like Charles Schultz peanuts.
I also like the ones I eat too.
I remember I used to go to this restaurant called the Ground Round, and you just ate the peanuts and you just threw the shells on the
floor.
ground.
I know.
Yeah, on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Favorite baseball announcer of all time?
I'm gonna go Len Casper because even though Harry Carey obviously has this like aura about him, the peak watching and interest for me was, more recent. And when Len was with the Cubs, he always gave this great sort of like, he didn't take away from the broadcast, he added just enough. But Jason Benetti, who doesn't ever call my team, he calls the White Sox, is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember Paul Carey and Ernie Harwell. Man, he would go, there's a deep fly ball to left center field. It could be, and it's going to be caught by the shortstop. I'm like, what in the world is happening right now?
I like the famous Matt Vasgersian call when looked like it was going to be a game-winning homer, gets caught right at the wall, and he says, "You gotta be dry shaving me." He caught it. Well, and of course, Vin Scully is the greatest. I'm just biased because Len called all the good stuff for my squad.
Yeah, of course. So did Steph Curry this year change how you already felt about him as a player?
I mean, every day I think I feel more strongly about how much I love Steph Curry. I mean, just the recent thing that just upped it another notch was that he finished his college degree and his thesis was on gender equity in sports.
Right.
You remember a couple years ago, there was a young girl who wrote him a letter saying she was sad that there wasn't a girl's version of his shoe. And then he worked with the shoe company to start creating that. I think also, though, it's like he's an awesome dude who's really nice, super cool. But in addition to that, he's so talented and fun that since Michael Jordan, I think he is the player that has provided the most laughter while watching basketball, where they just do something and you're like laughing at the sheer insanity of it. LeBron had amazing dunks and there's plenty of great players. I love watching Kevin Durant when he's at peak powers, but I really haven't laughed as much watching basketball from probably anyone other than Steph and MJ because your brain is like blown.
Transformational. And, he helped start a golf program at an HBC, he interviewed Obama.
So much stuff. He's amazing.
What in the
He's
world?
amazing. Yeah.
If every basketball player doesn't want to strive to be like him, I mean, I really don't know, what's wrong with you. Okay. Favorite meal to cook?
Ooh, I'm a vegetarian and I love all different kinds of like interesting stir fries. So like 2 nights ago, I made like a black pepper tofu with asparagus. I love any sort of like curry. So wow. I do a lot of different kinds of veggies and rice and different sauces and stuff like that.
Wait, did your husband know this were you a vegetarian when you met?
No, we both became vegetarians around the same time, about 4 years ago.
What was the reason?
Mostly animals. I've always
okay.
been a little bit weird about meat anyway, but just kind of powered through sort of like the cognitive dissonance of like, I don't want to look into it too bad. And then I started learning more about pigs and they basically have the same intelligence as like 3-year-old toddler humans and they're amazing. And I was like, maybe I won't eat pigs for a little while. And I was like, maybe I won't eat anything for a little while. And that was 4 years ago.
Wow, that's fascinating. Who's your favorite women's soccer player of all time?
Oh, that's so hard. I think I gotta go Abby Wambach. I love Foudy. Foudy's my gal, but Abby, for me, like, love her so much as a person, and then talent-wise, swagger-wise, all of it.
Man, you chose somebody that was born the same year as you too. That's fascinating.
I know, right?
Do you have a favorite rec sports moment since you love to play rec sports?
Oh, wow.
Do I give
So
it
I
like
will
a
say,
walk-off or anything?
I will say, I wish that was still the case, but now I have radio till 8 p.m. every night, and my body is
Right.
so broken from I tore my Achilles in college. Now I have a couple bulging discs and my stuff's falling
Oh
apart.
my God.
But I can't play as much anymore. But trying to think. I mean, I've won a number of Chicago Sport and Social League championships, to the point where I had to give away some of the shirts because I was like, who needs 9 shirts that say champion on them? I think actually one of my favorites was in college, during track when it was not technically in season. Otherwise, I would have gotten in trouble for this. I played a little bit on a like a rec basketball team, and 3 of my good friends at Cornell had quit the men's team. They were on the team at Cornell and then they quit. And so we played in the rec league. And so it was me and my friend who was also an AAU nationals basketball player, and then 3 dudes like 6'5", 6'8", and they were dunking and throwing alley-oops. And this is like, keep in mind, this is also a Cornell rec league basketball league. So like
Right.
we were really, serving it to some nerds. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, that is classic. Favorite WNBA player of all time?
Sue Bird with Elena Dellin on a close second.
Man, another one born the same year as you. That's
I
incredible.
know.
Okay,
I
that's
know.
fascinating. Lucille Ball or Betty White?
Betty White.
Man, she was amazing. Shaq, Kenny, Ernie, or Chuck on Inside the NBA on TNT?
Chuck is my guy. Honestly, he says some dumb stuff, but like he is such a nice guy. I'll tell you, I met him once at ESPN 1000, ran into him again at the United Center, and I think maybe that time I reminded him who I was. And then after that, I would see him on the red carpet at the ESPYs. Hey, Sarah, how you doing? Hey, congrats on the wedding. I'm like, and then when he's in town for the All-Star weekend and hanging out. We went out to Arizona for vacation, and I texted him, we were nearby, and he's like, oh, let's go out to dinner. Like, he's just such
Wow.
a good person, so kind, so funny, so smart, and really is exactly what you imagine. If anybody hasn't read the story about the man he became friends with on a business trip, who he had a drink next to at the bar, and the secret friendship that they had for years and years, and then Chuck going to his funeral. If you haven't read that story, like, that is a great summation of just what a wonderful person he is.
Yeah, I think he's a role model, sort of.
Yeah. He says not to be. He makes mistakes. He has takes on things that I do not agree with. He has stuff that he says about social issues that I'm like, Chuck, let's talk about this some more. Let's get into it. But it all comes from like such a good place and such a good heart.
Absolutely. Okay, a couple more. Do you have a favorite podcast besides your own?
I have a couple. The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos, who's been a guest on mine. Love listening to that. We Can Do Hard Things with Glennon and Abby Wambach and Glennon's sister. So incredible, so informative. Smartless is one of my favorites. Just anytime I need a laugh and to feel joyful, Smartless, it's Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes. And they have the best guests and the best, they're not the best interviewers. They're not very disciplined, but it's all very fun. And then the one that was like my gateway drug for all podcasts was WTF with Mark Maron. And that's really what I based my podcast off of a lot, was that deep dive interview style, with people about, their careers. There's a bunch more. Fresh Air, This American Life. There's too many, but yeah, it's a bunch of them.
What's the best trick that your dog can do?
Well, so I have 3 dogs. The best trick of the 3 is Banks, who is one of the 2 pit mixes, low rider. So he's got the giant head and the short body. He looks like maybe he could have a little like bulldog or like Frenchie in him. He does this thing called the penguin, where he can be only on his hind legs with his other legs up here, and he looks like a penguin. So that's my favorite.
That's typical of a small dog, but for a pit mix to be doing it. That's really impressive.
It's usually like those little fluffy ones that do it. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay, so where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you want to be doing besides what you're doing?
The hope would be, and I believe I've been saying this for longer than 5 years now, so I'm gonna keep putting it out in the universe. I want my own TV show. It could be streaming if that's the way the world is now, but as I've gotten older, the focus has potentially changed. I still would love to do what would amount to more of a late night talk show feel, where I got to incorporate the interviews that I love doing on my podcast with some of my comedy and Second City background, and sort of have it be this, lighthearted, but sort of what you'd expect from a late night talk show. But in the sports specific space, I would like to host a show about women's sports. I think there are massive gaps in coverage where we highlight winning a title or one exciting play, but we really don't have the daily conversations that allow people to understand the stakes and the stars and the stories required to invest deeply. And when you offer those up to people, they care. We know that because of the Olympics. We know that because of the Little League World Series. We know that because of the World Cup. Things that they know nothing about that you present to them in a compelling fashion, they suddenly get really invested in. We don't do that with women's sports enough. And that's because it's here's a highlight, here's a highlight, here's one news story real quick, here's a feature length, 2-minute piece on some specific athlete. But we don't talk about who should be hired, fired, benched, who's dating who, like all the stuff that makes us interested. So I'd like to do a show like that.
That's awesome. Okay, so if you could choose 3 people at your dinner table, I know you've answered this probably before, but it has to be dead or alive and you've never met them.
Oh my God, this is so mean. Okay, Barack Obama.
Okay. So you've never met Barack?
Never met Barack. Barack Obama, Stephen Colbert, obsessed with Stephen Colbert.
So funny.
And so smart, and his reference points and his humanity. If you've never read the interview in GQ about him as he was about to transition from the Colbert Report to the Late Show, you have to read it.
Okay.
He gets deep into his grief over the death of his siblings and his dad in the plane crash, and death in general. And it's what I've reread it probably 10 times. It's just one of the most beautiful articles and interview pieces. This is so hard. Oh my God. I mean, there's people, how is this dinner just for fun? I mean, okay, Barack and Steven are going to be, but I also because now I'm like, okay, is it Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, Mindy Kaling?
Oh my God.
Or is it like Hillary? Okay. Oh, but there's so many musicians I'd want to talk to about, and I'm not including anyone dead, which is a real miss because there's like centuries worth of interesting people, but I don't know much about them. We have a lot of connection points. I'm gonna go with Amy Poehler, and I am already thinking of all the other answers that are possible. But I think combination of just bringing me joy and being interesting and thoughtful and getting along with Obama, and yeah. And I've never met any of them.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation, interesting dinner. What wine would you bring?
I'm a big fan of big-bodied cabs. My favorite new cab is called Lola, Lola. And it's from a small winemaker. Yeah, Lola. And a friend who's a Somm brought it to my birthday party in Napa a couple of years ago, and now I'm obsessed.
Wow.
So shout out to Lola stuff. Cab.
Yeah, shout out, man. That's phenomenal. Well, I know you got a lot of bigger and better things going on, but to take time out for the small ones like me, I really appreciate it. We've had Dr. Richard Lapchick, we've had Judy Sweet.
We've had,
oh man, Dr. Lapchick's amazing.
His life story is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, anything we can ever do for you, please let us know. And we're just going to try and keep the conversation going, especially on this 50th anniversary of Title IX. So much love, the utmost respect to you and what you're continuing to do, not only in ESPN, but outside the lines.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. All right. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Sarah Spain from ESPN. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have come on our show that have talked about suicide, Shea Hillenbrand. Yeah. I mean, there's been so many that have come on and just talked about depression, which is good. It keeps the conversation going.
Yeah, for sure.
I admittedly was a little bit nervous for that interview. I wasn't as nervous for Jay Billis or Seth Greenberg, or I think Dr. Lapchick I was a little bit nervous about. But I don't know. She's this incredibly powerful, polarizing woman, not just because she works at ESPN, but she's clearly brilliant. And I just love listening to what she had to say. It all resonated with me. And of course, I got a little bit fired up about those white influencers that continue to remain silent, which is as deafening as anything that I've ever seen. And to her point, why is it people of color that have to continue to be the ones that are outspoken about these issues, about people that are marginalized? So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Sarah Spain. She's amazing, and in 5 years you heard her. She hopes to, continue to go down the path that she's on and have her own show. And I think eventually she'll get that break. She's pretty amazing. If you haven't heard her on ESPN, check her out. She's been on there for years, and she's great at interviewing and having great conversations with Jason Fitz. And it was an honor to have her on here today. All right, thanks for joining us here today again in the Sports Deli podcast, where everyone deserves a seat at the table. Thanks for sharing space with us today. We truly hoped you enjoyed that amazing interview. Remember, everyone, Black Lives Matter. Stop the bullying. Stop the Asian hate. Contact your local and state politicians for any inequalities, for any individual or any group that's being marginalized. Also, everyone, we want to raise awareness for those individuals that are currently imprisoned for non-violent offenses, in particular those with long-term sentences that are disproportionate, in particular to those people in the Black and brown community. And I want to send a shout out to 40tons.co. 40 Tons is a socially conscious cannabis brand, and they're a social enterprise using the regulated cannabis industry to fight injustice, in particular for cannabis prisoners. So check them out again at 40, the number 4, the number 0, tons, plural, 40tons.co, because what they're doing in the cannabis space and being a socially conscious company is truly incredible, and they have my full support. And also wanted to remind all of you, if you're having a tough time, you can always call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that number is 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255, and they are available 24/7, 365 days a year. You can also always check me out on Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok at Mike Hootner. Thanks again to our amazing sponsors, Breaking Tea, SportRx, PSK Collective, City Lokes, and Moolah Kicks, which you can see right here up on the screen. You can search them online at breakingtea.com, sportrx.com, pskcollective.com, moolahkicks.com, and citylokes.com. And if you'd like to support us at the Sports Deli, we'd love to have you either make a one-time donation or feel free to make a donation monthly, either 99 cents a month, $4.99 a month, or $9.99 a month. If you have questions about that, send me an email again to thesportsdeli@gmail.com, and I will send you the link on how you can do that. You can also find it at the bottom of every podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Link at the bottom to support the show. Please check out our website at thesportsdelipodcast.com. Make sure that we continue the conversations with regards to 3 strikes and you're out and mandatory minimums, especially people that are in jail for non-violent offenses. So those things need to change. And remember, gents and ladies, please remember to do your monthly self-breast examinations. And remember, guys, this afflicts about 1,500 men annually, with about a third of those resulting in death. So we want to make sure that we do our monthly self-breast examinations, both men and women. And guys, remember to do your self-testicular examinations every month as well. Until next time, remember, it takes a village. For Dr. J and Coach K, I'm Hootie Hoot. This has been a production of Hootie Hoot Productions. Thank you for joining us in the Sports Deli, where everyone deserves a seat at the table. Remember, it takes a village. Much love, everybody.